Hold on, just a little more.
I can't feel my leg.
Dad?
Chicago, before dawn. Marco Reyes, a single dad with one suit and one shot, pedals through a winter storm to an interview at a renewable energy firm. Screams slice the wind. A bus hits a propane truck. Under the wreck, a woman whispers for help. Marco drops his briefcase, uses a bent bicycle spoke and his belt to stop the leak, and drags her free. He misses the train. Did he lose their future or find it? The radiator clicked, then went quiet. Before dawn, snow climbed the kitchen window of Marco Reyes' cramped Chicago apartment. The microwave clock blinked 4:57. He smoothed the collar of his one-good suit under a warm work shirt and dabbed a nick on his jaw. On the wobbling table sat a printed email from Northline Grid and a manila folder with a resume he'd revised a dozen times. "Dad?" Leo stood in the doorway, 8 years old. Hair wild, socks mismatched. "You're really going?" "I'm going," Marco said, keeping his voice steady. "Early train. Big glass building. People who make the grid safer." "Then pizza every Friday," Leo said, reminding him. "Every Friday," Marco said, loosening the tie that felt like a knot. An old bike wheel leaned on a chair, weekend patch job undone. A single spoke lay bent on the laminate. Leo plucked it, a bright ping. "It sings." "Lucky charm," Marco said, sliding it into his parka pocket with his gloves. He liked carrying something that could become a tool. The world often asked for improv. He poured cocoa into 2 chipped mugs. They drank standing because the table wobbled. On the fridge, a paper calendar showed overtime blocks penciled in hard. Rent due circled in red. An overdue notice hid under a lighthouse magnet. "Does it pay a lot?" Leo asked. "It pays enough," Marco said, picturing a place with a real second bedroom, not a curtain. "Mostly, it's good work. Safer work. The kind people don't see, but they sleep because of it." "You already don't sleep," Leo said and yawned. "Is it still pizza tonight?" "It's still pizza," Marco said. "Plain for me. You can ruin yours with pineapple." "Pineapple forever," Leo said, grinning. Marco checked weather on a cracked phone. Wind advisory, lake snow moving in fast. He slid the folder into his backpack, close to his chest. His father's watch ticked under a scratched crystal, the canvas strap worn smooth by years of turning wrenches. Leo ran to the bedroom and returned with a folded drawing, a stick figure with a bike, a tall building with a flag, a big round pizza cut into 8 slices. He pressed it into Marco's hand. "So, you don't forget." "Forget what?" Marco asked, crouching. "The important part," Leo said, then softened. "Me." "Especially you," Marco said. He tucked the drawing behind the interview email. The paper gave the folder a weight that felt like direction. He laced his boots, soles glued twice, frayed ends knotted short. He shrugged into the parka, the zipper slow. At the door, Leo wrapped his arms around Marco's waist. The boy smelled like soap and pencil shavings. "You got this, Dad." "I got this," Marco said. He locked the door. In his pocket, the bent spoke pressed against his glove, a thin line of metal, quiet and useful. The hallway lights flickered. A draft pulled cold along the peeling paint. A TV murmured a weather warning behind a neighbor's door. Far off, the L rumbled. Steel on steel. Marco took the stairs. The elevator had read out of order since summer. On the stoop, wind shoved at the door. Snow came slantwise under sodium lamps. He rolled his bike from the rack, checked the brakes, pressed a thumb into each tire. His breath fogged. The street wore a thin white gloss. He pulled the hood tight, clipped on the backpack, and tucked the folder deeper. He looked up at their window. Leo's small silhouette raised a hand to the glass. Marco lifted his glove in answer. The promise felt simple and enormous at once. Reach the interview, change the shape of their days, make Friday pizza a forever thing. He set his foot to the pedal and pushed. The wheel bit through the crust of snow. Lights blurred with flakes. He lowered his head into the wind and steered toward the station, toward a platform and the train that would carry him toward the future he'd promised, not knowing what the storm would set in his path. The wind off Lake Michigan cut sharper than he'd expected. The city looked ghosted. Snow swirling through empty streets, streetlights, hazy halos. Marco pedaled hard, each rotation creaking through ice-crusted gears. His breath came white and uneven. The old bike wobbled when gusts pushed from the side, but he kept steady, thinking of Leo's voice. "You got this, Dad." Halfway down Halstead, a bus rumbled past, throwing slush over his boots. He wiped his face with his sleeve and pushed on. The clock on a passing storefront read 6:22 a.m. If the storm didn't get worse, he'd make the train with minutes to spare. He tried not to think about the what-ifs. What if the manager didn't like him? What if his resume looked too blue-collar? What if they only wanted degrees, not decades of turning bolts? He shook it off. He'd studied every spec sheet Northline Grid published, every safety upgrade they'd announced. He knew the equipment better than most of their engineers. Snow built on his shoulders. His fingers numbed around the handlebars. He pictured Leo again, pressing his face to the window, watching him vanish into the white. That thought warmed him better than gloves ever could. At 6:37, a horn blared from somewhere ahead. Tires screamed. Marco's head jerked up. Near the L tracks, taillights flashed in chaos. 1, 2, then a bright orange bloom as metal slammed metal. A deep thud echoed across the street, followed by the hiss of gas. Smoke feathered upward, gray against white. He slowed, heart thudding. A city bus had skidded sideways across the intersection, its side crushed against a propane truck. Steam rose from twisted steel. People were shouting. Doors jammed. Windows spiderwebbed. The acrid smell of fuel hit his nose. For a moment, instinct told him to keep riding. Someone else would help, right? He had a train to catch, a life to change. He glanced at his watch. 18 minutes until the interview. Just 18. But the sound came again, a faint cry, thin, desperate. "Help! Please!" The voice carried through smoke and wind. He froze. It came from the far side of the wreck. Marco laid the bike down and ran, slipping on ice. His boots sank into snow mixed with oil. "Hey!" he shouted, waving at the handful of people gathering at a distance. "Anyone call 911? A man yelled, "They're on the way! Gas leak! Don't get close!" The air hissed louder. Marco covered his mouth with his sleeve and edged closer. The cry came again, weaker now. He could just make out a shape, a woman trapped halfway under the crumpled bus frame. "Hold on," he said, crouching low. "Don't move." Her face was streaked with blood, her orange safety vest half buried. "Gas! Leaking!" she rasped. "Propane, valves broken." He scanned fast. The main valve under the truck's tank was cracked, spewing gas in a steady stream. His mind clicked into the rhythm of the problem-solving he'd used in 100 repairs. He needed pressure, leverage, anything to stop the hiss before ignition. His backpack held only papers and a wrench too small. He looked around, found nothing but debris and the twisted remains of his bike. The bent wheel. The spoke. He yanked it out, wrapped his belt around one end, tightening it fast. "This might sting," he said. What are you doing?" She coughed. "Buying us time." He slid under the frame, snow and fuel seeping into his clothes. Using the bent spoke as a makeshift clamp, he wedged it into the valve joint, twisting until the hiss softened to a whisper. The smell thinned. His lungs burned. "Can you move?" he shouted. Her eyes fluttered. "Legs pinned." He jammed his shoulder against the metal, pushed once, twice, groaned with the weight, and finally heard the crunch of shifting steel. The woman crawled free, clutching his arm. "Go," he said, helping her toward the curb. The sirens were close now. Fire trucks howled through the snow. As he stumbled back, the world blurred in siren light. The woman sagged against him, breath shaking. "You saved me." Marco nodded, catching his breath. "We'll call it even someday." When paramedics reached them, he stepped aside, wiping oil from his face. His clothes were soaked, his gloves torn. His watch had cracked. The hands stopped at 6:51. He looked toward the station in the distance, the one train that would have carried him toward his shot. A new sound rolled through the storm, the departing whistle fading into the wind. He exhaled once, steady, and let the sound go. The paramedics took Avery first. Marco followed at a distance, his legs trembling from cold and adrenaline. Snowflakes clung to his lashes. The sirens echoed against the steel beams of the L, disappearing into the white air. He leaned on a lamppost, chest heaving, the bent bicycle spoke still clenched in his hand. It was warped now, blackened with fuel, a twisted sliver of the morning that had just torn his life apart. He could still hear her voice, hoarse, frightened, human. "You saved me." He hadn't done it for thanks. He'd done it because no one else had moved, because sometimes doing nothing wasn't an option. When he finally started toward the station, his boots left dark streaks in the snow. The wind had eased, but the city felt heavier, quieter, as if the storm itself was holding its breath. The train platform came into view, fenced off with yellow tape. Uniformed officers waved people away. Through the flurries, Marco could see the empty tracks glistening in the faint dawn light. A security guard stopped him at the stairs. "Station's closed, sir. Whole line suspended till further notice. Accident. Up the street." "I was supposed to catch the 6:55, Marco said. His voice cracked, though he tried to sound calm. "Is there another train?" The guard shook his head. "They're shutting it all down for the investigation. Try later." Later. The word stung. He'd missed it. The one chance. He looked down the block where the bus still smoldered. Firefighters moved through the haze like ghosts. The smell of propane lingered. He pulled his cracked watch from his wrist and slipped it into his pocket beside the bent spoke. The train was gone. The interview was gone. The wind scraped his face raw as he turned back toward home. By the time he reached their building, the sun had climbed, a dull orange disk behind gray clouds. The world looked almost normal again, but he wasn't. He felt hollowed out, like the inside of him had burned quietly while no one watched. He trudged up the stairwell, boots leaving watery prints. At his door, Leo's drawing was taped crookedly, his stick-figure dad smiling beside a tall building. Marco rested his forehead against the cool wood. For a moment, he thought about turning around and riding anywhere else, but he knocked softly. The door opened a crack. Leo's face appeared, sleepy-eyed, hair messy. "Hey, buddy," Marco whispered. "Dad?" Leo blinked. "You're early." "Yeah." He managed to smile. "Interview got moved." "Did it go okay?" Marco crouched, wiping a smear of grease from his sleeve. "I think I did the right thing today, even if it wasn't the thing I planned." Leo frowned, confused, but nodded slowly. "So, pizza, anyway?" "Pizza, anyway," Marco said. That evening, they sat cross-legged on the couch, a cardboard box between them. The heater rattled like it might quit. Leo told stories from school, how Mrs. Kwan's cat video had made everyone laugh. Marco smiled at the right parts but barely heard. He kept seeing the woman's face in the smoke, the way her hand had reached for his. Later, after Leo fell asleep under a blanket, Marco sat by the window. Snow still fell, faint and slow. The city lights blurred through the glass. He took the bent spoke from his pocket, turning it between his fingers. The metal caught a faint glimmer of light. 6 months of preparation gone in one morning. Still, he couldn't make himself regret it. 2 days later, an email from Northline Grid appeared in his inbox. "We regret to inform you the interview cannot be rescheduled." He stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Then he shut the laptop and let out a slow, tired breath. He picked up the spoke again and laid it beside the drawing Leo had made. 2 fragile reminders of why he'd chosen what he had. The world went on. Trains ran again. The crash cleared from the news, but the story inside him stayed. of one morning where a stranger's life and his own crossed in fire and snow. He didn't know her name, only her voice. And though he tried to move on, every time he rode past the spot under the L tracks, he slowed down. Because sometimes the moment that ruins everything is the same one that begins something else. You just don't know it yet. 3 weeks passed before Marco heard her name again. He was tightening a bolt under a boiler in the back of the repair shop when his phone buzzed. The caller ID read, City of Chicago Safety Division. For a second, he thought it might be about the accident, maybe more questions. But the voice on the other end was calm, measured, a woman's voice. Mr. Reyes, this is Avery Sinclair. We met. Well, you saved me. He froze, wrench in hand. Oil dripped somewhere near his boot. You're alive, he said, and instantly regretted how that sounded. A soft laugh. Alive, yes. Limping a little, but alive. I wanted to thank you properly, not through reporters or some press release. Can we meet? He hesitated. You don't owe me that. I know, but I'd like to see you. There's a city hearing this afternoon about the crash, public safety protocols. I think you'll want to hear what's said. He checked the time. His shift ended at 2. The hearing started at 3. I'll be there. The city hall lobby smelled like old paper and wet coats. Marco sat near the back of the council chamber, suit cleaned but still faintly marked by oil that wouldn't wash out. Snow clung to the window ledges outside. At the front, a woman with a cane stood to speak. She wore a gray coat and a faint smile that didn't quite hide the stiffness in her step. When she turned slightly, Marco recognized her profile, the same calm eyes he'd seen through smoke and fire. The incident under the Halstead tracks, she began, voice steady, showed our system's failures. But it also revealed something else, how ordinary citizens act faster and braver than the infrastructure designed to protect them. Her gaze swept the room, and then caught him. For a second, all the bureaucratic noise fell away. Afterward, as the crowd spilled into the hall, she moved toward him. He stood awkwardly, hands in pockets. The bent bicycle spoke hung from his keychain like a sliver of memory. I wondered if you'd come, she said. I almost didn't. Why? Didn't think anyone'd want to see the guy who shut down half a train line, he said, trying to smile. She tilted her head. You didn't shut it down. You saved a life. He looked at her cane. You sure about that? Avery nodded. I'm here, aren't I? She glanced at his keychain. You kept it. It's a reminder. Metal bends before it breaks. That's poetic, she said softly. He shrugged. Mostly practical. They walked together through the marble hallway, footsteps echoing. Outside, the storm had finally broken. Sunlight filtered through thin clouds, melting snow into shining puddles on the steps. Coffee? She asked suddenly. There's a place across the street. No reporters, I promise. He followed her to a small cafe tucked between 2 offices. The smell of roasted beans and cinnamon felt like warmth itself. They sat by the window, steam curling up from their cups. So, Avery said, you were heading to an interview that morning. He raised an eyebrow. You did your homework. I read the paramedic report, found your name, the train schedule, the timeline. You would have made it. Guess not my day. Guess it was mine, she said, quiet. He studied her for a moment. Her left hand trembled slightly when she lifted the cup. You work for the city? Inspector for Safety and Hazard Response. Or I used to be. Taking some leave right now. You should, he said. That day, no one should have walked away from that. She smiled faintly. You're the only one who didn't walk away from it, Marco. You ran toward it. He didn't know how to answer that. The words sat heavy between them, true in ways he hadn't meant them to be. Anyway, she said, setting her cup down, I wanted to thank you properly, and maybe help if I can. He frowned. Help? There's a small manufacturing firm I consult for, Priya Manufacturing. Good people, bad safety setup. They need someone who understands real risk, not just policy. Would you consider meeting them? He blinked. You're offering me a job? An introduction, she corrected. Not charity. You earned this one. Marco looked out the window, where the snow now melted into glittering water on the sidewalk. He thought of Leo's calendar, rent circled in red. He thought of the nights he'd come home smelling of grease and pretending not to be tired. He met Avery's eyes. Okay, I'll meet them. She smiled, gentle, assured. Good, I'll set it up. They sat in silence for a while, watching a bus roll by, its windows fogged. The same city that had almost killed her now hummed outside like it never missed a beat. For the first time in weeks, Marco felt something shift. Small, uncertain, but alive. Maybe the storm hadn't ended anything after all. Maybe it had just rerouted him toward what was waiting. 2 days later, Marco stood outside a squat brick building on the south side. The faded sign read, Priya Manufacturing, Est 1979. A snowmelt ran in rivulets down the gutters, steam rising from a nearby vent. Inside, he could hear the hum of machinery and the clatter of metal against metal. The same song he'd worked to all his life. Avery met him at the entrance, bundled in her gray coat, cane tapping softly on the concrete. Don't let the rust fool you, she said. They build good parts here. Industrial valves, pressure seals, old-school stuff. The owner, Mr. Patel, needs help keeping the place compliant before the next inspection. They've had a few close calls. Marco nodded, tucking his gloves into his pocket. You're sure I'm the right guy? Marco, you fixed a propane leak with a bicycle spoke, she said, smiling. You're exactly the right guy. Inside, the air smelled of coolant and metal shavings. Workers in navy jumpsuits moved between machines, shouting over the hum of compressors. The place looked lived in, tired, but proud. Mr. Patel, a stocky man with silver hair and grease-stained hands, greeted them near the back office. You're the technician Avery mentioned? Yes, sir. Marco offered his hand. I've worked in safety retrofits, not officially, but plenty of real-world training. Patel studied him. Paperwork? Marco handed over a folder. His certifications, his resume, the same one he'd taken to Northline. Patel flipped through the pages, frowning thoughtfully. You were heading for an engineering post? Was, Marco said quietly. Didn't get there. Patel nodded once. You start with observation. 1 week. If you find what our last consultant missed, we'll talk about pay. Avery caught Marco's glance. He gave a small nod. Fair enough. That week, Marco kept his head down and his eyes open. He moved through the plant floor, listening more than he spoke. He watched the way workers tightened bolts without checking pressure limits, how warning labels peeled from old gauges. He noted oil leaks that could have been small fires waiting to happen. Each night, he jotted notes in a battered notebook. Replace valve seals, add pressure cutoff, retrain night crew on tank handling. The handwriting looked rough, but the ideas were sharp. Avery stopped by on Thursday afternoon, carrying 2 coffees. You're quieter than I expected, she said, setting one beside him. Easier to listen that way, he replied. She smiled. Fair. How's it going? They've got good people, bad habits, fixable stuff, the kind that's ignored until something blows. Think you can fix it? He looked at her, really looked. The cane, the faint limp, the steadiness in her eyes. Yeah, he said, but I'll need a little chalk, a few hours, and trust from people who don't trust easy. Then I'll make sure they listen, she said simply. That evening, Marco gathered the workers in the main bay. The floor was streaked with oil and dust, the air thick with the smell of machines cooling down. He knelt, drew a line of white chalk across the floor, then another forming a rough diagram. This, he said, tapping the chalk with a wrench, is where the next fire starts if we don't fix the valve alignment. This one here, that's where your pressure backup will fail if it doesn't trigger in time. The men and women circled him, curious now. He explained every motion. Where to cut gas flow, where to check sensors, how to rig a shutoff with scrap metal if the system failed. Most of safety, he said, wiping his hands, is just paying attention when no one else does. A few of the crew nodded. Someone clapped softly. Patel watched from the edge, arms crossed but eyes approving. Avery stood near the door, smiling faintly as chalk dust rose under the hanging lights. Marco's sleeves were rolled to his elbows, his hands moving with the ease of a man who'd found his language again, not through words, but through motion, purpose, precision. By the weekend, his diagrams covered half the concrete floor. He built a prototype leak detection alarm from spare sensors and wiring, tested it twice, and left a note taped to it. Not perfect, but it works. That night, he came home exhausted but lighter. Leo was sprawled on the couch, a slice of pizza hanging from his fingers, cartoons flickering across the screen. "Hey, Dad," the boy called. "Did they like you?" Marco hesitated, then smiled. "I think they saw what I can do." He sat beside his son, watching the TV glow reflect on the bent spoke still hanging from his keychain. He turned it slowly, feeling its weight, the memory of fire, of choice, of second chances. He didn't know it yet, but that small piece of metal, the one that had once saved a life, was about to build him an entirely new one. The next few weeks passed in long hours and slow victories. Marco showed up before dawn, when the factory lights still flickered to life, and left after sunset, when the hum of machinery had faded into silence. The leak detection system he'd rigged from spare parts caught on faster than he'd expected. Workers started asking questions, good ones. Why this valve? Why not use the older gauge? He liked their curiosity. It reminded him that safety wasn't just about rules, it was about trust. Avery stopped by once or twice a week, bringing reports, sometimes just coffee. She still walked with her cane, though she hid the pain behind a steady grin. Whenever she watched him work, there was a quiet pride in her eyes, as if his progress was somehow hers, too. Mr. Patel, never one for praise, surprised everyone one morning by calling Marco into his office. "You turned my shop into a classroom," he said, "and nobody fell asleep. That's a first." Marco chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." Patel slid an envelope across the desk. "Week's pay, plus a bonus. You earned it. Stay another month? Help us finish the new safety grid?" Marco nodded, though a small flicker of doubt tugged at him. This wasn't the dream job, not the shiny corporate future he'd pictured. But every night, when he saw Leo asleep on the couch with a slice of cold pizza and the news murmuring low, he knew this honest work, was worth more than any corner office. Still, doubt had a way of sneaking in when the world went quiet. On a Friday night after putting Leo to bed, Marco sat at the kitchen table with a stack of unpaid bills. The glow of the single bulb cast sharp shadows on the paper. He rubbed his temples and muttered, "One step at a time." He glanced at the drawing Leo had given him, himself, the tall building, the pizza. The edges were smudged now, but it still made him smile. He reached for the bent spoke on his keychain, turning it over between his fingers. "You got us this far," he whispered, half laughing. "Don't give out on me now." Outside, snow fell again, soft and unhurried. The city lights shimmered through it like distant stars. The next morning, Avery showed up at the factory with a small box in her hands. "For you," she said, setting it on his workbench. Inside was a new tool set, sleek, polished steel, every wrench labeled. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said, "but I wanted to. Call it an investment." "In what?" he asked. "In someone who does things right even when no one's watching." He met her eyes, unsure how to respond. Gratitude swelled in his chest, mixed with something deeper, quieter. He wanted to say more, but Patel's shout from across the floor broke the moment. "Marco, that new valve you rigged, it works!" By day's end, the factory's alarms and sensors hummed perfectly. Workers tested the new grid with mock drills. Every time the alarm tripped and shut down a line safely, cheers erupted. When Patel handed Marco a signed contract extension, Avery was standing nearby, leaning on her cane. "You've built more than a system," she told him softly. You've built faith. Marco smiled faintly. Feels strange, being seen. Maybe you were never invisible, she said. People just hadn't looked close enough. That weekend, he took Leo to the park, the first time in months he hadn't worked a Saturday. They built a snow fort together, laughing until their hands went numb. Dad, you look happy, Leo said. I think I am, Marco replied, brushing snow from his hair. Then pizza's on me tonight. Marco laughed. Deal. Just don't tell the delivery guy we're broke. Leo grinned wide, his breath misting in the air. As they walked home, Marco's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered, expecting another factory call. Instead, a voice said, Mr. Reyes, this is City Safety Enforcement. Your design at Priya Manufacturing has been reported for evaluation. It's impressive work. He froze mid-step. Reported? For what? For commendation, sir. Marco hung up slowly. Snow crunching under his boots. He looked down at Leo, who was humming to himself, swinging their joined hands. Maybe doing right didn't always mean standing still after all. Maybe it was finally starting to move forward. The following Monday began like any other. The factory buzzed with the rhythm Marco had come to love, the clang of wrenches, the low hum of compressors, the hiss of pressurized air testing new lines. But by mid-morning, Patel's voice crackled through the loudspeaker. All staff to the main floor. City safety officials are here for inspection. A murmur rippled through the crew. Marco set his wrench down and wiped his hands on a rag. Avery had warned him this might happen someday, but not this soon. 2 inspectors in reflective jackets entered, clipboards in hand. Behind them came a third figure. Avery, dressed professionally now, her cane gone. She walked steady, confident. Patel clapped his hands. Team, meet Ms. Avery Sinclair, City Safety Division. She's the reason we're still standing after that propane fiasco. Avery smiled politely. Her gaze flicked across the room, landing on Marco. Their eyes met for half a second, long enough for him to realize she hadn't told anyone she'd brought him here. The lead inspector gestured to the new safety grid Marco had built. This is your upgrade. Yes, Patel said proudly. Designed by Mr. Reyes here. You'll find it simple, but effective. Marco stepped forward, explaining how the pressure sensors detected leaks through vibration changes, how the low-cost alarms used recycled wiring to make maintenance cheaper. The inspector nodded, scribbling notes. Unorthodox, he said. But clever. When the inspection ended, Patel's shop earned the highest compliance rating it had ever received. The crew cheered. Avery stayed behind, waiting until the others dispersed. You didn't tell them, Marco said quietly. I wanted them to see you for who you are, she replied. Not as someone I brought in, but someone who belonged here on merit. He looked at her, gratitude caught in his throat. Thank you. For what? For letting me earn something that matters. That evening, after the workers left, Marco lingered by the chalk lines on the floor, now faint and half-washed away. Avery joined him, her steps echoing in the wide room. You ever think about that day? She asked. Every time I smell propane, he said, half smiling. Every time I hear sirens. I used to replay it, she admitted. How close it came, how I couldn't move, and then... She paused, watching him. You appeared, out of nowhere. He shrugged. Guess the universe wanted you alive. Maybe it wanted both of us alive, she said softly. The air between them went quiet. Machines ticked as they cooled, and snow drifted against the windows again, lazy and soft. Leo, doing okay? She asked, breaking the stillness. Better than me, most days. He keeps me honest. She smiled. Sounds like my kind of kid. He likes you, Marco said. Keeps asking when you'll come for pizza night. Avery laughed quietly. Maybe soon. She turned to leave, then stopped. Oh, by the way, the city's submitting your safety system to a regional review. I didn't include your name. He frowned. Why not? Because if it wins, you'll get the call yourself. No introductions, no favors, Just recognition for the work, not the story. He nodded slowly. You really believe in this, huh? I believe in people who do good because it's right, she said. That's rarer than any award. That night, Marco rode home with snow brushing his jacket. He passed the same stretch of street under the L where everything had changed. The place where the bus had burned, where he'd almost lost everything. Now it was just an empty lane, quiet under the falling snow. He stopped his bike, dismounted, and stared at the spot where he'd found her. The faint scorch marks were still visible on the guardrail. He pulled out the bent bicycle spoke, rubbed his thumb across its curve. He whispered, "Worth it." When he got home, Leo was waiting at the table, the pizza box already open. "You're late," the boy said, "but I saved you a slice." Marco ruffled his hair. "You're a good man, Leo Reyes." Leo grinned. "Did you fix the world today, Dad?" Marco chuckled softly. "Not the world, just a piece of it." He sat down, sharing the last slice with his son. The bent spoke sat on the counter, catching the kitchen light, a tiny curve of metal, now carrying the weight of everything he'd lost and everything he was slowly rebuilding. And somewhere, in another quiet apartment across the city, Avery stared at the same winter sky and thought of him, how a stranger's act of courage had reshaped both their lives. 2 weeks later, Marco was locking up the factory when his phone rang. He almost ignored it, unknown number again, but something told him to answer. "Mr. Reyes?" a man's voice said briskly. "This is Ethan Ward, CEO of Northline Grid. I read the safety report filed under the city's commendation review. We'd like to meet you." For a moment, Marco didn't breathe. Northline. The name still hit like an echo from a life he thought he'd missed for good. I think you might have the wrong Reyes," he stammered. "I'm just a contractor." The man chuckled lightly. "The contractor whose design prevented a major gas explosion last month? We don't think so. We're offering a partnership, not employment. Independent consulting. Would you be open to that?" Marco leaned against the workbench. His knees felt weak. "Yes, sir. I'd be honored." "Good. My assistant will reach out. Congratulations, Mr. Reyes." When the line clicked dead, he stayed still for a long time, staring at the chalk lines faintly etched into the concrete, the ghosts of his teaching sketches. Avery had kept her promise. She'd let his work speak. The next day, he met her at the same coffee shop where they'd first talked after the accident. She was reading a safety journal, a faint smile on her face when he walked in. "Someone's been busy," Marco said. Avery looked up. "You got the call." "How'd you know?" "I submitted the report," she said, "but I left the author blank. I wanted them to find you." He sat across from her, still dazed. "They want to bring me in as a consultant." "That's what I hoped." He laughed softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "You planned this all along, didn't you?" She sipped her coffee. "Let's call it faith in good people." He studied her for a moment, the way her hair fell across her cheek, the calm focus in her eyes. Gratitude swelled in him, warm and steady. "Thank you, Avery," he said. "Not just for the job, for believing I could matter again." "You always mattered, Marco," she said quietly. "You just needed someone to remind you." That night, back home, Leo was sprawled on the floor with his Legos. "You look happy," the boy said. "I think I got that job, buddy. The real one this time." "Then pizza forever?" "Pizza forever," Marco laughed. Leo grinned, then looked serious. "Did Miss Avery help you?" "Yeah," Marco said, kneeling beside him. "She did more than help." "She's nice," Leo said. "You smile more when she's around." Marco froze halfway through stacking Lego bricks. "Do I?" Leo nodded wisely. "You should invite her to pizza night." The following Friday, he did. Avery hesitated at the door, holding a small paper bag. "Hope this isn't too forward," she said. "I brought dessert." Leo appeared instantly, wide-eyed. "Hi, Miss Avery. You brought cookies?" "Chocolate chip," she said, laughing as he grabbed the bag and ran to the table. The apartment was small, one lamp, one couch, and the smell of tomato sauce thick in the air. Marco poured her a glass of ginger ale, the closest thing to celebration champagne he had. "To unexpected rescues," he said, raising his glass. She touched hers lightly to his. "To people who never stop trying." Leo devoured pizza slices while Marco and Avery talked. She asked about his new proposal, about how he planned to design affordable leak detectors for small businesses. He asked about her recovery, her job at the city. Somewhere between laughter and silence, the distance between them disappeared. When Leo finally drifted to sleep on the couch, Avery looked around the small room, drawings taped to the fridge, toolboxes stacked in corners, life built piece by piece. "You've made a home," she said softly. Marco shrugged. "It's small." "It's enough," she replied. "More than enough." He looked at her then, really looked. The woman whose life had once intersected his in chaos and fire, now sitting quietly in the warm light of his kitchen. "Funny," he said, "how the worst day of my life brought me here." Avery met his gaze, eyes glimmering. "Maybe it was never the worst day, Marco. Maybe it was the start." When she left that night, snow was falling again, gentle and slow. She paused in the doorway, turning back. "You know," she said, "Leo's right. You do smile more now." He chuckled softly. "Guess I've had a little help." "Keep it," she said. "You wear it well." He watched her walk down the hall until the elevator doors closed. And, for the first time since the storm, Marco felt like life wasn't something he was chasing anymore. It was something that had quietly, beautifully caught up to him. Winter began to fade, but in Chicago, spring never arrived quietly. It crept in between storms. Marco's days at Priya Manufacturing soon gave way to new beginnings. The Northline Grid partnership turned out to be more than a contract. It was a chance to build something that carried his name, something Leo could be proud of. He registered his small company as Reyes Safety Systems. The office was modest, a single rented room above a hardware store. With flickering fluorescent lights and a hand-painted sign Leo insisted on making himself. "It's perfect," Marco said, even though the paint bled a little around the edges. He spent mornings drafting designs and evenings consulting at Priya. Some nights he'd fall asleep at the desk, blueprints scattered under his head like a pillow of dreams. But he never complained. He'd been tired before. This was different. This was purpose. Avery visited often, sometimes to help with proposals, sometimes just to sit with coffee and quiet conversation. She had a way of making his cluttered workspace feel calm, like her presence steadied the storm that still lived somewhere in him. One night, as he adjusted a schematic on the table, she asked, "Do you ever miss fixing machines with your hands?" He smiled faintly. "This still feels like fixing something, just on a bigger scale." "Because it helps people," she said. "Because it keeps people safe," he corrected gently. "My dad used to say machines don't fail. People do. I guess I'm trying to make things a little more forgiving." She nodded, eyes softening. "That's exactly why it'll work." The first real test came in early May. Marco was at Priya reviewing maintenance logs when a commotion broke out near the southern wing. Someone had accidentally opened a high-pressure valve during a refill cycle. The hiss of escaping gas filled the air, sharp, terrifying. Workers shouted, scattering for the exits. Marco ran toward the sound. "Kill the main line," he yelled. But the control panel jammed halfway through the shutdown. His heart hammered. Too much pressure, too fast. Then, through the din came a piercing tone, a steady, pulsing alarm. His alarm. The leak detection system he'd built months earlier had triggered exactly as designed. Within seconds, the automatic lock valves engaged, sealing the leak before ignition. The air fell still. No one spoke for a moment. Then one of the workers clapped. Another followed. Cheers filled the floor. Patel's voice cracked as he approached. "You saved us, son. Again." Marco exhaled, laughing with disbelief. "No," he said, looking around at the workers. We saved us. He spent the rest of the day documenting the incident, his hands still trembling as he typed the report. By the time the city inspectors arrived, everything was under control. That night, back home, Leo tackled him the moment he stepped inside. "Dad, Miss Avery came by. She brought cookies." Marco looked toward the kitchen. Avery stood there, smiling sheepishly. "I heard what happened," she said. "Thought you could use some sugar." "News travels fast," he joked, wiping soot from his sleeves. "Patel called me. Said your system just passed the toughest test imaginable." He smiled, leaning against the counter. "Guess it worked." "No, you worked," she said. "You built something that saved lives." Leo piped up, mouthful of cookie. "Told you Miss Avery was magic." Marco laughed. "If she's magic, what does that make me?" "The assistant," Leo declared proudly. Avery chuckled. "Smart kid. He gets it from his mom," Marco said softly, and for a heartbeat, silence filled the room. Avery didn't ask questions. She just nodded, her gaze gentle. They ate dinner together. The three of them crowded around the small table, laughter rising with the steam of reheated pasta. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't planned. But it felt like home. After Avery left, Marco tucked Leo into bed. The boy blinked sleepily. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "When you saved Miss Avery that day, did you know she'd come back?" Marco smiled, brushing hair from his son's forehead. "No, I just knew someone needed help." "But she came back anyway," Leo murmured, eyes closing. "She did," Marco whispered. "Sometimes the world gives back in ways you don't expect." He turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to Leo's steady breathing. On the counter, the bent bicycle spoke lay under the lamp, its curve catching the light. Marco picked it up, turning it between his fingers. It was scratched, scarred, but still whole. Just like him. The following Monday morning, the City Safety Board released its official report on the incident at Priya Manufacturing. It praised Marco's system for preventing a potential catastrophe through innovative, low-cost design. His name appeared in print for the first time. Marco Reyes, Independent Safety Consultant. He read the words 3 times, unable to stop smiling. The article wasn't about heroism this time. It was about craftsmanship, ingenuity, responsibility. All the quiet things that didn't make headlines but built legacies. He forwarded the article to Avery. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed with a message. "Told you the world would notice. Proud of you, Marco." He texted back. "You believed first." Then, as he closed his laptop, he noticed something new in his inbox. A message from Northline Grid's CEO, Ethan Ward. Subject: Partnership Proposal. Reyes Safety Systems. Mr. Reyes. After reviewing your recent system design and city commendation, I'd like to formally invite you to partner with Northline Grid as an independent safety consultant for our upcoming wind farm expansion. Let's set up a meeting this week. Marco leaned back in his chair. Wind farm expansion, real renewable work, not patch jobs. He rubbed his face, overwhelmed. He'd been fixing leaks for survival. Now he'd be preventing disasters that stretched for miles. He called Avery. She answered on the second ring. "Northline wants me," he said. "I know," she replied, smiling in her voice. "Ethan called me first to check if you were real." He laughed. "And what did you tell him? That you're stubborn, overworked, and allergic to self-promotion, but that you're the best engineer I've met." "Engineer? That's generous." "You earned it," she said. Later that week, he found himself walking through Northline Grid's downtown headquarters, the same building he'd dreamed of entering months ago. The lobby gleamed with polished marble and glass, the smell of fresh coffee and ozone in the air. He smoothed his jacket, feeling oddly calm. Ethan Ward, tall and silver-haired, greeted him with a firm handshake. "Mr. Reyes, I've read your work. That detection system, simple, brilliant. You designed it on site?" "With chalk and spare parts," Marco said, smiling. Ethan laughed. The best ideas usually start that way. We want you to consult on our rural energy hubs. Flexible contracts, full autonomy. Marco exhaled, steady. That's exactly what I've been working toward. They signed the agreement that afternoon. No suit, no fancy tie, just a handshake and quiet pride. That evening, Marco took Leo to the riverfront for pizza. The boy leaned over the railing, throwing crusts to the ducks. So, Dad, does this mean we're rich now? Marco laughed. Not rich, just safe. Leo wrinkled his nose. Safe sounds boring. Safe is the reason we get to have pizza, Marco said. Then I like safe, Leo decided, nodding. As the sun set over the river, Avery joined them. She carried a thermos of cocoa and 3 paper cups. Heard the good news? She said. Leo jumped up. Dad's famous. Avery smiled. I'd say respected. Fame fades, respect doesn't. They sat together, watching the city lights shimmer on the water. The wind tugged gently at their coats. Marco felt something deep in his chest settle. Peace, maybe. A sense of enough. You know, Avery said quietly, when I was under that bus, I thought my story was ending. Turns out it was just intersecting with yours. Marco met her eyes. You changed mine too. Leo interrupted, giggling. You guys sound like a movie. Avery laughed. Maybe one day it will be. A week later, the first Northline contract check arrived. Marco stared at the envelope on the kitchen counter for a long moment before opening it. Then he turned to Leo. We're starting something new, buddy. What's it called? Reyes Safety Systems, Marco said proudly. We make sure people get to go home safe every night. Can I help? You already do, Marco said, smiling. You remind me why it matters. That night he called Avery. You ever think about leaving the city job? Sometimes, she admitted. Why? I could use someone who sees things I miss. She hesitated, then said softly, Let's talk about it over dinner. 2 nights later, she showed up at his apartment carrying takeout boxes and a folder of diagrams. They spread papers across the table, brainstorming until midnight. New systems, designs, small business outreach. When the ideas ran dry, they just talked, about everything and nothing. At one point, she glanced toward the fridge where Leo's drawing still hung. He drew that before all this? Yeah, Marco said. The tall building was supposed to be the job I never got. Avery smiled. Guess he knew something you didn't. He looked at her, eyes soft. Guess he did. Before she left, he walked her to the door. You sure you don't want to stay for dessert? He asked, half teasing. She smiled. Maybe next time. But before she turned to go, she touched the bent bicycle spoke hanging from his keychain. You still carry it, she said. Always, he replied. It reminds me not to let go of what's worth saving. Avery's smile lingered as she stepped into the hallway. Then don't. When the door closed, Marco stood there for a long time, feeling the hum of something new beginning. Not just work, not just success, but life rebuilding itself, one quiet miracle at a time. By early summer, the city had begun to whisper Marco's name in quiet circles. Inspectors, engineers, contractors. Reyes Safety Systems was suddenly the go-to for smaller manufacturers who couldn't afford the corporate giants but still wanted to keep their workers safe. What had started as one man with a chalk line and a bent bicycle spoke had grown into a registered business with 2 part-time technicians, a donated van, and an inbox full of requests. On Monday morning, Avery stopped by the office carrying fresh bagels and a stack of papers. She wore a light blue blouse and her hair tied back, looking both professional and effortless. You're officially booked for 6 weeks, she said, grinning. I told you this would happen. Marco smiled. Still, feels strange. People calling me Sir. You earned that, Mr. Reyes. He raised an eyebrow. If you start calling me that, I'm firing you before you're even hired. She laughed. Then call me what I am. Your partner. The word hung in the air. partner. She meant it professionally, he thought, mostly. But something about the way she looked at him made his heartbeat stumble. "Deal," he said, his voice softer than he intended. That afternoon, they visited a local school that had requested help after a minor boiler leak. Marco crouched beside the aging system, tracing pipes with a flashlight while Avery took notes. The principal, a frazzled woman with coffee stains on her sleeves, watched anxiously. "Can you fix it?" she asked. Marco nodded. "It's not about fixing, it's about preventing. I can make sure this doesn't happen again." When the repair finished, the principal offered to pay in cash. Marco shook his head. "Buy the kids new safety masks instead, that's enough." Outside, Avery looked at him sideways. "You're terrible at business." He shrugged. "Maybe, but great at sleeping at night." She smiled. "You're something else, Marco Reyes." A week later, the city released its annual safety awards. Marco didn't attend. He was elbow-deep in a valve installation when his phone buzzed. Patel's voice crackled through the static. "You won, son. Reyes Safety Systems, commended for outstanding public safety innovation." Marco froze. Grease streaked across his sleeve. "That's a mistake." "No mistake," Patel said proudly. "The mayor just said your name." Before Marco could reply, he heard another voice behind him, soft, amused. "He's right," Avery said, stepping into the room holding a certificate framed in glass. "You didn't check your mail." She handed it to him. His name gleamed at the top. Award of Merit, City of Chicago. Marco blinked, caught between disbelief and laughter. How long have you known?" "Long enough to frame it," she said, smiling. He turned the certificate over in his hands. "This isn't just mine. It's ours, yours, Patel's, everyone who gave me a chance." "You're the one who showed them what a second chance looks like," she said quietly. Later that night, the three of them, Marco, Avery, and Leo, sat on the apartment floor surrounded by pizza boxes and soda cans. Leo held the framed certificate like it was a trophy. "You're famous now, Dad." "Famous for fixing leaks," Marco said, ruffling his hair. "Hey," Avery said, nudging him playfully. "Saving lives is decent PR." Leo beamed. "Does this mean pizza twice a week?" "Nice try," Marco said, laughing. "Still just Fridays." They stayed up late, trading stories and plans. Avery sketched ideas for community outreach programs. Leo built Lego models of factories, and Marco just watched. Two pieces of his world that somehow fit together perfectly. At one point, Avery leaned closer and said, "You ever think about how one choice changed everything?" He looked at her. "Every day." "You missed a train," she said softly, "and ended up exactly where you were supposed to be." He smiled. "Guess I did." Before she left, he walked her downstairs. The night air was warm, carrying the scent of rain and streetlight glare. "You didn't have to frame that certificate," he said. She shrugged. "I wanted you to see what everyone else already sees." "And what's that?" "A man who turns disaster into purpose." He smiled faintly. "You give me too much credit." "Not enough," she said. They stood there, neither wanting to leave. Finally, she whispered, "Come to the park tomorrow. There's something I want to show you." "What is it?" She smiled, stepping backward toward her car. "You'll see." When she drove off, Marco stood under the streetlight, the framed certificate still in his hand. The glass caught the glow, reflecting a life he'd never planned but wouldn't trade for anything. The next afternoon, the park glistened under early summer sunlight. Children ran barefoot through the grass, kites fluttered above the lake, and somewhere nearby a musician played soft jazz on a saxophone. Marco spotted Avery near the fountain, her hair loose and golden in the light, holding something wrapped in brown paper. He walked up, smiling. "You didn't tell me if this was business or pleasure." "Maybe both," she said, eyes dancing. "Sit." They took a bench overlooking the water. A warm breeze carried the smell of lilacs and street vendors' popcorn. Leo, who'd insisted on coming, ran toward the playground, promising not to get dirty, then immediately dove into a sandbox. Avery handed Marco the package. "Go ahead." He tore it open carefully. Inside was a sleek brass keychain, handcrafted, shaped like an infinity symbol. At its center gleamed the bent bicycle spoke, polished smooth, fitted perfectly within the curve. He stared at it for a long time. "You kept it?" "I borrowed it," she said. "Thought it deserved a second life, like its owner." Marco turned it over in his hands, his throat tightening. "It's beautiful. It's you," she said softly. "Bent, maybe, but never broken." He looked up, meeting her eyes. There was something in them, warmth, courage, maybe love, though neither of them said the word yet. "You know," he said quietly, "the night after the crash, I told Leo doing the right thing felt like standing still. But now—" He looked at her. "Now it feels like moving forward." "That's because you finally stopped walking alone," she whispered. They sat in silence for a while, watching Leo chase a butterfly. The world felt simple again, safe, full of color. As the weeks passed, Avery began spending more time at his small office. She helped organize clients, edited proposals, even started mentoring his new hires on compliance documentation. She had a knack for detail. He had the hands-on instinct. Together, they worked like clockwork, steady, natural, effortless. Sometimes she'd stay for dinner, bringing takeout or homemade soup. Leo always greeted her with questions about her job, her favorite cookies, whether she could fix a robot he was building out of cans. One night, as they ate spaghetti in the glow of a single lamp, Marco said, "You know, I don't think Leo's ever liked anyone this much since—" He trailed off. Avery reached across the table, her hand resting lightly over his. "Since his mom?" He nodded. "She passed when he was 3, heart condition. I promised him we'd always keep going. Some days, I didn't think we would." Avery's voice was soft. "You kept that promise." "Barely." He smiled faintly. "You helped." She squeezed his hand gently. "You helped me first." Over time, what began as partnership turned into something neither could quite name. They didn't rush it. They didn't need to. It grew quietly, in the spaces between laughter, in shared coffee breaks, in the way she brushed his sleeve when handing him a file. One evening, after Leo had gone to bed, they sat side by side on the couch, talking about nothing. Favorite movies, missed dreams, the way life sometimes gives back what it takes. Avery laughed when he confessed he'd once wanted to design bicycles professionally. "Guess you did, in your own way," she teased. "Saved one person's life with one." He smiled, leaning back. "Maybe I just needed a reason." "Maybe you were always the reason," she said softly. The room went still. The city hummed outside, quiet but alive. Marco looked at her, searching her face. "Avery, don't," she whispered. "Not yet. Just stay here, like this." So he did. No promises, no declarations, just quiet understanding, the kind that didn't need words to be real. A few days later, she came to the office carrying blueprints for a new safety proposal. "If Northline approves this," she said, "we'll be protecting over 200 facilities next year." Marco looked at her proudly. "We?" "Of course, we," she said, smiling. "This isn't just your company anymore. It's ours." Leo burst into the room at that moment, holding a paper airplane. "Dad! Miss Avery! Watch this!" He threw it. It nosedived immediately into Marco's coffee cup. Avery laughed until she cried. Marco couldn't stop smiling. He looked around the small office, the worn desks, the sunlight slanting through dusty blinds, the people he loved filling the space, and realized something simple, something whole. He hadn't just built a business, he'd built a family. That evening, when he dropped Avery off at her apartment, she paused before getting out of the car. "You ever think about what comes next?" He smiled. "Always. And I'm not afraid of it anymore," he said. She leaned over, pressed a light kiss to his cheek, and whispered, "Good, because next is here." Marco watched her disappear into the lobby, the faint trace of her perfume lingering in the air. He touched his cheek, smiled, and looked down at the keychain glinting in his palm. The bent bicycle spoke, reborn as something whole. Life, he realized, had bent him too. But with her, it had finally found its shape again. Christmas Eve came quietly that year, the city hushed beneath fresh snow. Streetlights glowed like lanterns, and the world outside Marco's apartment seemed wrapped in silver and stillness. Inside, warmth filled the small space, the smell of baked bread, soft music, and laughter that carried through every corner. Leo had hung paper snowflakes in the window and stacked empty pizza boxes into a makeshift Christmas tree. "Best holiday ever," he declared, standing back to admire his handiwork. Avery was there too, helping him tape a star made from foil on top. "You're quite the engineer, Leo," she said, laughing. "Like my dad," he said proudly, "but mine's taller." Marco grinned from the kitchen, sliding a pan from the oven. "Only because you keep eating my pizza." Avery turned, smiling. "You're just jealous he's creative." "I taught him everything he knows," Marco said, setting the pan down. "Except how to share," Leo teased. They burst into laughter, the kind that filled a room with more joy than any gift could. Later that night, after dinner, Marco reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box wrapped in silver paper. "Before we open presents," he said, "there's something I need to give first." Avery blinked, surprised. "Marco, you didn't have to—" "I did," he said softly. "You once told me the universe bent us toward each other. I guess it really did." She opened the box. Inside lay a delicate ring, simple, elegant, the metal glinting faintly gold under the lights. The centerpiece wasn't a diamond, but the bent bicycle spoke, reshaped into a perfect circle. Her breath caught. "You made this?" "Cut it, soldered it, polished it," he said quietly. "That piece of metal saved your life, and mine in its own way. I thought maybe it should keep doing that." She looked up at him, eyes shining. "Marco—" "It's not a proposal," he added quickly, his voice shaking slightly. "Not yet. It's a promise that whatever happens we keep showing up for each other, like we did that day." Avery smiled through tears. "You don't have to promise that." "I already did," he said, "the moment I saw you under that bus." She laughed softly, tears running down her cheeks. "You really are terrible at small gestures." Leo ran over, eyes wide. "Is that for Miss Avery?" Marco nodded, kneeling beside him. "It's made from the same spoke we used to fix the leak." Leo looked at it reverently. "So, it's a hero ring." Avery laughed, wiping her eyes. "I'll take that title." She slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then she leaned down and kissed Marco, slowly, softly, the kind of kiss that says, "We made it through." Leo clapped. "Ew!" he shouted, giggling. Marco pulled back, smiling. "Hey, you started this family." Avery ruffled Leo's hair. "You sure did, kiddo." They spent the rest of the night on the couch, Leo curled between them, drifting off to sleep with a half-eaten cookie in hand. The firelight flickered across the walls, casting golden reflections on the framed certificate that now hung above Marco's desk. Outside, snow fell thicker. Avery rested her head on his shoulder. "You realize this is the first Christmas I've actually looked forward to in years?" Marco looked down at her. "Me too." She traced her finger over his palm. "You gave me more than a ring, Marco. You gave me back faith." He swallowed, his voice rough. "You gave me something to build toward." They sat in silence after that, watching the snow blanket the city, the sound of Leo's gentle breathing filling the room. Near midnight, the radio played quietly, an old song about hope, about coming home. Marco whispered, "You think fate's real?" Avery smiled without opening her eyes. "Maybe not fate, but choice? Definitely." He nodded. "Then I choose this." She smiled, whispering back, "So do I." Outside, a wind stirred through the trees, carrying flakes of snow like tiny sparks. The world had turned full circle, from the roar of fire and twisted metal to this, a quiet home, a boy's laughter, and two people who found love not through grand miracles, but through simple, stubborn kindness. Marco reached for Avery's hand, their fingers entwined. "That day," he murmured, "I thought I'd lost everything." Avery opened her eyes and looked at him. "Turns out, you found where you belong." When the clock struck midnight, Leo stirred, mumbling in his sleep. "Merry Christmas." Marco smiled. "Merry Christmas, kid." The fire crackled. The storm outside deepened. And, for the first time in years, Marco Reyes felt no fear of what tomorrow might bring, only gratitude for the road that had led him here. The next morning dawned clear and blue, sunlight bouncing off the snow like glass. Marco woke first, the apartment still wrapped in silence. Avery's head rested on his shoulder, her ring catching a soft gleam from the window. Leo lay sprawled on the carpet beside the pizza box tree, one hand still clutching a cookie, the other resting on the bent foil star that had fallen during the night. Marco smiled. The world outside could rush as much as it wanted. Inside these four walls, time finally felt like it belonged to him. He rose quietly, started the coffee, and stood by the window. The city stretched before him, Chicago reborn under a fresh coat of white. For a long time, he'd seen it as a maze of missed chances. Now, it looked like a map of everything he'd built. Every corner a reminder of the roads that bent but never broke him. Avery stirred. "You're up early," she murmured. He turned, grinning. "Old habits. My brain still thinks I have a 6 a.m. shift at the shop." She yawned, sitting up, hair tousled. "You don't have to fix everything anymore, you know." He poured her a mug of coffee and set it beside her. "Can't help it. Fixing things is how I breathe." Avery smiled, wrapping her hands around the cup. "Then promise me one thing." "What's that?" "When something's not broken, don't try to fix it." He laughed softly. "Fair deal." By mid-morning, Leo was awake, tearing into wrapping paper. Most of the gifts were practical: new sneakers, a stack of books, a second-hand science kit. But one small box caught his attention. Inside was a shiny silver whistle on a chain. "What's this for?" Leo asked. Marco crouched beside him. "You remember what I told you about paying attention?" "Yeah. That whistle's for when you see something wrong and everyone else looks away. You use it. Promise?" Leo nodded solemnly. "Promise." Avery smiled. Another Reyes safety engineer in training. Leo puffed out his chest proudly. "Junior consultant!" They laughed together, the sound echoing through the tiny apartment like sunlight itself. Later, after breakfast, they drove to the office to hang a new plaque on the wall. It had arrived in the mail that morning, a gift from Northline Grid. The inscription read, "Reyes Safety Systems. For integrity, innovation, and the courage to act when it matters most." Avery held it steady while Marco drilled the screws into the drywall. When he stepped back, the words shimmered under the light. He placed a framed photo beneath it, Leo grinning between them, pizza sauce on his chin, Avery's hand resting on Marco's shoulder. Underneath the photo, a small engraved plate read, "Opportunities return. People don't. Always choose compassion." Avery touched the plate gently. "That's your line." He nodded. "Maybe it's all I ever needed to learn." She turned toward him, her voice soft. "You built this, Marco, out of nothing but heart." He smiled. "I built it out of what I almost lost." She reached up, brushing a fleck of dust from his cheek. "Then maybe we're both proof that loss isn't the end." That evening, as they left the office, snow began to fall again. Light, drifting flakes that turned the streets into slow-moving poetry. Leo ran ahead, his whistle gleaming against his coat, leaving footprints that trailed toward the car. Avery slipped her arm through Marco's. "You know," she said quietly, "every time I hear the L train pass, I think about that morning, about how you missed it, he chuckled. Best missed train of my life. You really believe that? He looked at her, eyes warm. I don't just believe it, I live it. She smiled, resting her head on his arm. Then I guess I do too. Back home, the three of them curled up on the couch, the fire crackling low. Leo fell asleep first, whistle still around his neck. Avery rested against Marco's chest, her breathing slow, steady, safe. Outside, the city lights blurred through the snow, soft and golden. Somewhere far away, a train whistle echoed. Not a reminder of what he'd missed, but a quiet hymn of where he'd arrived. Marco reached into his pocket, pulling out the bent bicycle spoke's twin, the last fragment from that morning's wreck. He held it up to the firelight and whispered, "You did your job." Avery opened her eyes slightly. "What's that?" He smiled. "Just talking to an old friend." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Come here, Mr. Reyes. Rest for once." He leaned back, closing his eyes. The fire popped softly. The snow whispered against the glass, and for the first time in years, he felt complete. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything finally made sense. Framed on the wall above them, the plaque gleamed faintly in the glow of the firelight, its message catching the warmth of the room. Opportunities return, people don't. Always choose compassion. The storm that had once taken everything from him had, in truth, given him the life he was meant to find. One decision, one act of courage, one bent piece of metal that became a circle whole again.